I'm not actually sure that global respiratory virus pandemics are possible. This is, if I'm right, it's so important because, folks, if you don't know this, you should read up about it. The WHO has proposed an amended treaty, and the amendments are effectively, if it all gets signed off, that the WHO exclusively and without peer review gets to decide if a pandemic is occurring. And I assure you, you can make it look like a pandemic just by misuse of PCR testing.
Yeah.
So, for example, I personally don't think there's a bird flu pandemic going through the chicken and turkey and duck herds, flocks. I don't think so. But they're using them to damage the supply chain of food. Really, really frightening. So I've just lost the thread of the thinking. Yeah. So I'm not sure that. I'm not sure that a respiratory viral pandemic of any consequence is possible, because if you have a very serious infection, generally the ones that end up killing you generally have shorter incubation times. Not always, but it's a general rule of thumb. So if you think of toxicology, if you take a little dose of something, it doesn't make you ill, and then you take 3 times the dose and it makes you ill in a few hours. If you take 10 times the dose, it'll probably make you ill in a few minutes, whatever that is. Not always the case, but usually the severity and the lag period, the latency, the lag period, they tend to be inversely related. And so I think with something like Ebola, I think it's true that most people become ill the same day they become infected, something like within 24 hours or so. And that means, imagine if you had a respiratory infection like that. So it seems to me about the time you become infectious is about the time you become very ill and stay at home and stop transmitting to the wider public. So I have to work this out, and I want to check it out with some of our British epidemiologists and some others. I'm just not sure that what Gates et al. Constantly worrying about, I don't think it's actually possible. I think the only really good pandemic respiratory viruses are the ones that are highly transmissible and not very lethal. That I think they're the only one, and then you don't need to worry about it.